Hello, this is Chris Komolsky, who is the lecturer for Leadership Studies 1 CLC version. This is TUT number 2 for September the 17th, 2004, cohort 2. The topic for today is leadership theory. Are leaders born or made? I'm wondering if anyone is out there or whether I am broadcasting to nobody. Hello, just wondering if anyone is out there. My name is Chris Komolsky. I'm a lecturer for Leadership Studies 1 CLC version. Today's topic is leadership theory. Are leaders born or made? Today is the 17th of September 2014, and this is TUT number 2. If you are listening or watching right now, can you jump onto the group chat and just tell me that you're here? If not, I am going to possibly jump off this broadcast and send out the YouTube archive of our first cohort, as there are much more participants there. I'll give you a moment to see if you're there. Okay, I'm going to get rolling and just sort of do a brief version of this, just in case anyone is out there. Today what we're going to look at is the following. Leadership Theory Part 1. There are 4 theories that are up on your Funda, and I'm going to show you the lesson templates that are now out in just a moment. They're concerning 4 of the first 10 leadership theories. We're going to consider the great man theory, the trait theory, the skill theory, and the style theory of leadership. And today what we want to consider, because it's really foundational to everything else in leadership theory, is that first theory. It's called the great man theory of leadership. In addition, we'll sort of begin a regular practice for us during these TUTs as well as online, and I call that learning labs. Essentially what that is creating a small environment for us to consider and process different ideas that we raise in a lab or experimental way and try to bring application of that towards our own context. And so what we're going to do today is examine the great man theory of leadership through a pretty notorious pastor in the United States that you may know or may not know. His name is Mark Driscoll, and his church is called Mars Hill. And so what I want to do very briefly before we jump into these 2 points is to take you to Funda and just quickly give you a little tour of the updated stuff, because there's lots on there that you need to jump into. So give me a second to switch screens. Okay, as I just log into Funda really quickly. What I want you guys to see is a few things that I've updated within the site. And so let me go to the right class. This is your class, Leadership Studies 1 CLC version. You'll see a few things that I will point out to you very briefly. You'll see that there is a lot of information that has now been uploaded and ready for you to engage with under the lessons template. And there are lots of things in there about comments, etc. Your module introduction is fully loaded and ready for you to engage with. It has videos and comments and even last week's TUT. You'll also see that Unit 1, Part 1, which is a critical analysis of contemporary leadership theories, styles, and models, has now been fully uploaded as well. Again, there's lots of information in here, including articles and videos and clips and different Keynote PDF files that have slides and stuff that you need to work through, as well as several different videos and areas to comment and engage that I'm asking you to begin to participate in. Additionally, you can read some more information about it on here, but as I was just mentioning about the idea of what a learning lab is, we're going to have several of those both within these TUT formats as well as online under the lessons section of your Funda tab. And so you'll see that the first one is up there, which is primarily centered around a TED Talk, incredible TED Talk by a man named Simon Sinek called How Great Leaders Inspire Action. And so you need to jump into and start working through this material. What I want to show you lastly is this, that those 3 things have been uploaded, but Unit 1, Part 2 on down will start to be uploaded by the end of this week and into the weekend. And so basically your work is now laid out before you, and it's time to get rolling. Please email me if you have specific questions about this. I've tried to make it as simple as possible and yet engaging, because I know you value your learning experience, and I do as well. One thing I want to point out too as well, and for this I have brought out the module outline, is that I made a slight but important change to the module outline, particularly the assessments. And here's what I want to show you. I have lowered by 5% the critical analysis paper, and its total grade to 35%. I've also lowered by 5% assessment number 3, the video presentation, to 20% of your total grade. And I did both of those, leaving me with an extra 10% of your grade to do this right here. And I will highlight this on your screen. Basically, I forgot to do this, and so I'm sorry again for being such a newbie. But 10% of your final grade in this course will be a self-graded and then verified by me percentage of your online participation and engagement. And what I want you to do is, I'm not necessarily looking for you to post or comment about everything or to write long essays, etc. But I am looking for your engagement. I'm looking for your thoughtfulness. I'm looking for you to be brief and yet to the point in terms of working through the material. Particularly the comment sections are the areas where I ask you to reflect in a public way. And so please consider that as you spend time in the lessons over the next few weeks, because that is a 10th of your grade. Moving forward into today's content, I want to briefly spend a few moments speaking about a foundational theory within the whole area of leadership and leadership studies. And that is a theory by the name of great man theory. Now, I want you from the get-go to see that it is called the great man theory, not the great person theory. And I think you'll understand why in just a moment. But a man by the name of Thomas Carlyle in the 1840s wrote a really famous book that in its essence essentially spawned the modern history of leadership theory and study. And in it, he had a famous line that I've put on your screen for you that says this. He says, quote, "The history of the world is but the biography of great men." Again, let me read that again. "The history of the world is but the biography of great men." Take a moment and think about that, and think about the implications of what he's saying, and I'll continue with a little bit more explanation in just a minute. Moving on, as you sort of are chewing and wrestling with that for a minute, let me read you a bit further of an explanation about the great man theory. Quote, "The great man theory is a 19th century idea, so from the 1800s, according to which history can be largely explained by the impact of, quote, great men or heroes. These are highly influential individuals who, due to either their personal charisma, their intelligence, their wisdom, or their political skill, have utilized their power in a way that has had a decisive historical impact." Again, this theory was popularized first in the 1840s by the Scottish writer Thomas Carlyle. And in 1860, Herbert Spencer formulated a counter-argument that has remained influential throughout the 20th century up until today. Spencer said that such great men are the products of their societies, and that their actions would be impossible without the social conditions built before their lifetimes. So again, I want to give you a moment to sort of just read that slide over again. Go back to the first one. Take a second and read through that. And again, the idea, simple idea on the table is this. What is great man theory? What is it saying that leadership is about according to this particular perspective? Take a moment and reflect. Take another moment now and look at the counter-argument to that, popularized first by Herbert Spencer in 1860. And what I want to do as I'm having you think about that is take you all the way back to the beginning, to our first slide, and to say this. What do you think about this question as a framing question for today? Are leaders born or are they made? Again, are leaders born or are they made? Essentially, are leaders designed and impacted and chosen and set apart, etc., from before their birth? Or does one learn to be a leader, developing the skills and abilities and talents necessary to lead well? That's the underlying question, and the reason why that is such an important question for us is because that really influences all of leadership theory, even up until this day. A couple different points about this particular theory of leadership, sort of unpacking Carlyle's idea and how influential it was. He basically says that heroes shape history. They shape history through their divine inspiration, meaning that they often have, these people often have a perspective that God has given them a gift to lead, and that they have a mandate from Him to do some sort of task or great deed. But they also, at the same time, believe that they are capable, gifted, high-caliber leaders. And so it's this interesting mix of leadership given by God and yet owned by that particular person. Definitely, this theory would fall upon the side of argument in saying that leaders are born, they are not made. A more current or contemporary sort of version of this is the idea that great leaders arise when there is a great felt need to be met. This was first probably popularized in the early 1900s and into the middle of the century as the two world wars happened, at least in the West. And you know, that almost sounds, that third bullet point almost sounds like a Winston Churchill quote or something like that. But basically that when there is a great felt need, whether it's to eradicate polio or some sort of disease, or whether it's to deal with the devastation of the Great Depression, or whether it's to combat Nazism on the rise throughout Hitler's reign in Germany and beyond in the late 1930s and early 1940s, regardless, great leaders come to the surface when there's great need to be met. This perspective would suggest that your upbringing, your models, your access to leadership opportunities, all that sort of stuff, all of that reflects this innate ability to lead. And again, as you are considering this, the question on the table for you today is this. It's a very personal one, actually. Are leaders born or are they made? Now, quickly, you know, you see within 20 years or less, a definite school of thought that opposed this theory began to emerge from Herbert Spencer and others. And some of their critiques were very valid. They suggested things like, man, Carlyle, you are focusing on the aristocracy. You're focusing on kings and queens and dukes and people that own lots of land and people that are incredibly rich and people that are barons and sort of in a high state of society, those that already, you know, share and enjoy power. You called this a great man theory, Thomas Carlyle. You are talking and suggesting that the only leaders that can become great are male, which, to be fair, was something that was pretty deeply embedded within at least European historical culture of that day, as well as culture throughout much of the Western world. But basically, you know, critics of this theory say, well, you are completely diminishing the situation and the environment and the society in determining the ability of someone to lead. And yet it's undeniable, considering that we're talking about this in 2014 and through South Africa, that this theory spawned leadership theory. Again, the question on the table is very simple but very profound, and that's this: are leaders born or are they made? If you're watching this broadcast later on your own, or you're sitting with somebody right now, what I want you to do is just take 30 seconds and speak out loud, whether you're talking to yourself or talking to us, you know, somebody in person. And what I just want you to do is answer the question: are leaders born or are they made? As you consider that, what we're going to do is sort of turn the corner towards our second piece of learning today, which is our learning lab around the person and subject of Mark Driscoll. This is Mark Driscoll, and what we want to do is just take a few moments to examine the idea of the great man theory of leadership through him and controversy that has only grown in size and scope and ugliness over the past few months. Mark Driscoll is a very well-known pastor and author and Bible teacher in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, in the Seattle, Washington area. That's a state in the United States on the west coast, very close to Canada, Vancouver. And Driscoll had a number of books on the bestseller list, including the New York Times bestseller list for a recent release on marriage. He is planted and is the head pastor, lead Bible teacher at a church plant that has, boasts over 10 campuses all throughout multiple states. He has thousands of people come and see him teach every week, as well as even tens of thousands that listen to his teachings through podcasts and online. And so for us to say that this man doesn't have influence would be completely incorrect. Recently, often Driscoll finds himself in a bit of hot water because he has a pretty controversial opinion on just about everything, as well as a pretty combative, fiery style. And so recently, some former people that came to work for and with him came out into the public and began to confront his, what they call a severe abuse of power. And so what I want to do is I want to pull out two articles that were written recently. One is from the New York Times, of all places, a very liberal world newspaper based in New York City that often doesn't cover this sort of stuff, and so for them to write a front page article on this is very significant, as well as a smaller post from an online Christian magazine called Relevant Magazine. And what I want to do is consider a few ideas that were raised in both these articles as we look at Driscoll from a critical way, or a place of critique, to consider the implications of this theory. So my goal here is not to make fun of him, or to tear him down, or to gossip, but rather to consider the depths to which particularly leaders within a church are susceptible or tempted by the great man theory. And so let me do me a favor and just hold on a second while I screen share the correct thing. Give me a moment and I will pull up that New York Times article. The New York Times wrote an article on August 22nd that said, a brash style that filled pews until followers have them filled. And basically this is an article, a long one, about Mark Driscoll being urged to leave Marcel Church. I'll read you the first couple paragraphs. Mark Driscoll has long been an evangelical bad boy, a gifted orator and charismatic leader who built one of the nation's most influential megachurches, despite or perhaps fueled by a foul mouth, a sharp temper, and frank talk about sex. It claims 15,000 members worshiping on 15 campuses in 5 western states and more than 200,000 people watching its services online every week. You can imagine that Driscoll has become a celebrity within conservative evangelical Christianity, a sought-after speaker and prolific author, known for a celebration of masculinity that helped Marcel attract young men, which is a demographic that is sorely lacking within most of the church throughout the globe. Timothy Keller, who's an incredibly prolific author and himself, was quoted in this article by saying, Driscoll is really important. In this internet age, Mark Driscoll definitely built up the evangelical movement enormously. And yet, Keller writes, or continues by saying, but the brashness and the arrogance and the rudeness in personal relationships, which he himself has confessed repeatedly, was obvious to many from the earliest days, and he has definitely now disillusioned quite a lot of people. Within your Funda resources, the resources folder, there is a subfolder called Keynote PDFs. In there you will find the notes for this TUT today, as well as 2 articles on Mark Driscoll. One is this New York Times article, the other is an article from Relevant Magazine, where Mark Driscoll pens an open letter of apology. What I want you to do is to stop and pause this viewing and to go to your Funda site and get those uploaded. I will scroll down on my screen while you're doing that. If you are watching later, please pause this recording and go do that now. Okay, welcome back, everyone. You'll see that in these articles I've highlighted a number of paragraphs, and I just want to raise a couple ideas out of there, again, through the light or the lens of the great man theory. The New York Times writes, Mr. Driscoll rose to prominence in 2 early but important strains, in 2 important strains of contemporary evangelicalism. He was one of the early success stories of the emerging church movement, which critiqued the consumer-friendly nature of mainstream evangelicalism and sought to create what it described as a postmodern form of Christian worship. And he is one of the leading champions of New Calvinism, a theological orientation that embraces predestination, the idea that God is determined who will be saved and who will not. And so the first thing I want to say to you guys as we consider Mark Driscoll and his abuse of power, potentially, is the fact that he is rooted theologically in a very conservative place. Now, this is not my time to attack the conservative church or to suggest that it's wrong. I don't believe that, number one, and that is not my place, number 2. And more importantly, but I want you to see that people began gravitating to him, number 1, and at the same time, he was a leading proponent of this idea of New Calvinism, which strongly returns to the idea that some are chosen by God, that some are elect by God, that some are leaders by God, and others are not. And this is the place where his theological beliefs take their roots. Now, many people from the left have from more liberal places have lots of problems with this for a variety of reasons, some of which you can read in this particular article. He has controversial things to say about the role of men and women and what they're supposed to do. He has a lot of controversial stuff to say about who pastors or elders can be. He's very big into the submission of men under women. Some people will call that chauvinist. Others would say that he just objectifies them. A lot of people have a problem with some of his thoughts on homosexuality, of which this is not a place to talk about that now. My point is this. For the past few years, Mr. Driscoll has been incredibly controversial among the left, and yet you'll see as you read this article that more and more, the people that are going after him deliberately are those that were closest to him. So former workers, close friends, people that were pastors right alongside him are elders, and who he's been critiqued by most recently is conservative Christians, of which he is one. This paragraph is real important, and so let me just read it very quickly. Mr. Driscoll's critics trace the church's troubles to the year 2007, when the pastor demanded a revision of the church's bylaws to reduce the authority of most of the church's elders. 2 elders who objected were fired, and the church then ordered one of those elders shunned, meaning that all Mars Hill members were to cease contact with them, with his wife and with his children, effectively eliminating their social world. Really controversial thing that happened in 2007, although it was swept under the rug pretty well. But slowly, over the last 7 years, Mark Driscoll and those that he worked closely with have consolidated power under him and removed power, often harshly, to the point of breaking and ceasing all relationship from others. Back to the PowerPoint for a moment. Driscoll wrote an open letter of apology to people as this stuff was beginning to spiral out of control, and one of the things he said was this. He said, "In recent years, some have used the language of celebrity pastor to describe me and some other Christian leaders. In my experience, celebrity pastors eventually get enough speaking and writing opportunities outside of the church that their focus on the church is compromised, until eventually they decide to leave and go do other things. Without judging any of those who have done this, let me be clear that my desires are exactly the opposite. I want to be under pastoral authority and community, and a Bible-teaching pastor who grows as a loving spiritual father at home and in our church home for years to come. I don't see how I can be both a celebrity and a pastor, and so I'm happy to give up the former so that I can focus on the latter." I find it fascinating that he connects this idea of being a pastor with the dual idea of celebrity, or being a celebrity, and that he identifies the fact that many have considered him a celebrity, and in a large way he owns that himself. His whole phrase that he doesn't see how he can be both a celebrity and a pastor presumes on a deep level that he considers himself both. And yet, to get out of this controversy, he has repeatedly tried to move away from sort of the public eye. And that's his way of sort of owning some of the mistakes that he's made. Now, again, this is not about the fall of a man who once had a large platform. What this is actually about is an all too common thing that happens within our church culture, and that's this: we elevate people at the expense of the elevation of God's name or fame. And so what I want you to consider for a few moments, and I'm going to stop right now and just allow you to either pause this broadcast or let the silence run for a few moments, is I want you to consider a dialogue, either with yourself or in a journal, or if you're watching this with another person, with them. And what I want you to consider are the following 5 questions. Number 1, why is the church so susceptible or vulnerable to embracing the great man theory without critical evaluation? Number 2, how does the size of one's platform play into this problem? Number 3, why do we elevate pastors and other leaders to the level of celebrity hero? Oh, it's challenging. Is this healthy? Number 4, what voices are being silenced or not listened to within this temptation? And number 5, is there an alternative way? Take a moment and either read out loud, or discuss out loud, or journal your thoughts about a few of these questions, particularly the first and third one, as I think they're the most prominent. And I'll come back in a moment and make a few last comments. I'm going to mute myself. Enjoy reflecting on this for a bit. I'd like to point you to both of these articles in full and just ask you to read and consider this as well as other stuff that's online with a discerning spirit. I believe and love deeply the church at wide and don't want to see anybody's downfall. And yet, when I look at just the ugliness of this situation, how many people have been hurt, I cannot help but see the parallels between the elevation of Driscoll and the minimization of Christ. And so I don't say that critically. I say that really thinking about myself and how I tend to elevate my name and minimize others. And yet, what I want you to consider as we move into leadership theory is the fact that although there is deep good within all theory, really,
that we as Christ followers really believe that leaders have been born with a mandate or a calling that God has given them. We need to be incredibly humble and incredibly held accountable to that belief as it grows and matures in us, so that it doesn't get out of hand, and so we don't start believing our own hype. And so I will be praying for you and thinking of you as you consider this week, as you jump into the other lessons within this template and within our Funda site. And I want you to consider whether your name needs to be great, or whether the name and fame and renown of Christ needs to be great. And whether a Christ follower actually elevates deliberately other names. Please message me or contact me if you have any specific questions about the course. I'm so excited that you're here. There's a lot of good content online, and I look forward to your interaction and engagement. Please take care. God bless. We will see you in 2 weeks on October the 1st for tutorial number 3. Bye-bye.